Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishna Project podcast. This is episode number 115. A big thank you to everyone who continues to tune in on a regular basis from all over the world. We've got a very supportive global audience. I appreciate your views, your shares, your comments, your likes, your feedback, your emails. Sorry to those people I haven't responded to yet, but I do appreciate the support that we've now got all around the world for this podcast. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, to hit the all-important subscribe button if you haven't already, so you can be kept updated or keep yourself updated about future things happening here at the Hare Krishna Project. And also, if you're watching this on Facebook, that's the other way you can watch this podcast. Please do like or follow, if you haven't already, the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page, so you can be kept updated about podcasts and video productions here at the Hare Krishna Project. And I know that when I say that, it does work, because after every episode, the number of subscribers and likes and followers does increase. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Episode 115. I say this every time. I cannot believe we've made it to this number of episodes. And this episode is a bit historic, so to speak, because I'm about to welcome our first ever return guest. Now, if you've been a guest before and you're pestering me to return again, I'm sorry if I've had to put you off for a bit, but I've been putting Sukhi off, who's our guest, for about a year and a half. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Sukhi as our guest this week. Hare Krishna, Sukhi.
Hare Krishna.
Now, some of you might remember Sukhi. Sukhi was guest number, I looked it up this morning, guest number 40. She has appeared on the Hare Krishna podcast, Hare Krishna Project podcast before, and this is episode 115. So she's had to wait 75 episodes to reappear on the podcast. She's the most patient person that I know. So welcome back, Sukhi. It's great to have you with us. We last spoke in August 2022. That was a lifetime ago. My hair has grown since then, so I'm growing it. Sukhi, it's great to have you with us. Let's start with a quick self reintroduction from yourself. Tell us a bit about you and where you're from and your background, and maybe also give us a recap from the previous podcast we produced in August 2022.
Absolutely. So my name is Sukhi Bhakti Dasi. I am transgender, and I am a member of ISKCON, I guess you could say, whatever that means to be a member of ISKCON. I don't have an ISKCON, membership card or anything. Haven't taken any vows to ISKCON, but I guess you could say I'm a member of ISKCON. I am a disciple of His Holiness Deva Amrita Maharaj. And what else? I live in San Francisco in California. Yeah, and so I guess to recap about my previous video. So when I first came on here a year and a half ago, it was to discuss my experience kind of in my beginnings of involvement in devotional life. I started off my devotional life when I was 17, coming in contact with Prabhupada's books, chanting Hare Krishna. And then when I was 18, I joined the Bramacari ashram. So, and ran into some difficulties in that context. So for those who aren't aware or haven't seen the previous video, I am transgender. So what does it mean to be transgender? Typically, the definition that you would run into in modern society is, someone will say, well, I was born with, a boy, or I was born a girl, but rather than identifying with the body that I was born with, I identify with the opposite gender or some other variation of gender identity. So for instance, in terms of a transgender woman, generally they would say that, okay, I was born with a male body, but my spirit or my internal self is female. Um, I would define it a little bit differently. And the way that I define it comes from a lot of introspection, but it also turns out from reading the book Tritiya Prakriti by Amara Prabhu, that according to the Kama Sutra, the Vedic conception is similar to how I see it, which is that I have a physical body, which is masculine or male, and a subtle body that is female. So we understand as devotees from reading Bhagavad Gita, from reading Bhagavatam, that we all have, a gross physical body, which is made up of the five physical elements, water, fire, ether, air. What am I missing? Earth.
It's like a science lesson, isn't it?
And then we have our subtle body, which is made up of mind, intelligence, and false ego. And typically, there is like you could say they're kind of in tune with each other. Generally speaking, the nature of your subtle body. This is how I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the nature of your subtle body determines the nature of the gross body that you'll inhabit in your next life. Um, but there are cases where that's not what happens according to the Kama Sutra. Also in other cultures, like in Buddhist understanding, they understand it the same way. That by some kind of karmic reactions or some whatever kind of arrangement, someone might be born with a discordance between their subtle nature and their physical nature. So that's another thing that I think is important to understand. Although this transgender issue has become very kind of well known in recent times in the West, it is in no way a modern invention or a concoction. This is something that we find in the Vedic literatures. This is something we find in cultures around the world throughout time. In the Bible, it's mentioned. In the Quran, it's mentioned. In Srimad Bhagavatam, also, it is mentioned. For instance, in the 10th canto, there's one section where Arjuna is having some confrontation with another Kshatriya, and the other Kshatriya insults him by saying that, oh, you think like a trans woman. Of course, that's not the word how it was how it was translated, because the British used the word eunuch for transgender women. So that was the word that Prabhupada also used. And when Hridayananda Maharaj translated the rest of the 10th canto and then the 11th and 12th cantos, he also used the term eunuch. But if you dig deeper into the topic, then you find that eunuch generally broadly means a transgender person. Yeah, so I have known since as long as I can remember that I'm transgender. I've always seen myself as having a discordance between my subtle nature and my physical nature. But simultaneously, I guess from impressions from my past lives, I also always was attracted to yogic principles and kind of, a bhakti sort of philosophical understanding, and definitely an understanding that we're not our bodies. And so, and also an understanding that, material things aren't really what brings us true satisfaction. And in fact, any material thing that we try to, invest ourselves in to derive satisfaction is then becomes itself a source of anxieties and difficulties and suffering. So I understood this growing up. And because of that, I always tried to kind of put this whole transgender thing on the back burner, tried to kind of minimize the impact that it had in my life. It wasn't something that I shared with people typically. I'd say by the time I had graduated high school, there was probably less than 5 people that I had told that I felt that way. Um, and I really wanted to kind of skirt around the issue. So when I got the opportunity as an 18-year-old to join the Brahmachari ashram, that was one of the attractive features of that opportunity for me, that I felt that it was going to be an environment in which I could just fully absorb myself in Krishna consciousness, fully absorb myself in devotional service. And I felt confident that the process of devotional service has, as one of its side effects, um, the effect of cleansing the heart of, material contaminations, material conditioning. And so I was hoping that by being a brahmachari, by being away from women, by being away from, the opportunity to really be dwelling on the topic of my gender identity, that, I could just kind of get around the issue and overcome it. But unfortunately, over time, that turned out not to work out so well and led to depression issues and anxiety. Eventually, I left the Brahmachari ashram, moved to Vrindavan. It continued to be something that dwelled in my mind until finally, when I came back from Vrindavan and started studying psychology and anthropology in college, um, I, was very much confronted by the issue in the course of my studies, because naturally gender identity is something that comes up a lot in anthropological and psychological uh, study in academia. And so, yeah, I finally realized after what was it, about 8 years of just trying to skirt around the issue of my gender identity as a devotee, that it was really something that I needed to learn to deal with. And unfortunately, when I came out publicly and told everyone that I'm transgender and started transitioning, I ran into many, many difficulties, including being more or less banned from the temple that I had been a part of, or being very limited in the scope of, how I was welcome to participate. Um, Not being welcome at festivals like Rath Yatra. Um, yeah, and so, you know, for maybe about 4 or 5 years, I was away from Krishna conscious practice. And then actually, I would say that when I was last on the podcast, I was starting to warm up to being a devotee again at that time, but I wouldn't really say that I actually thought of myself as a devotee at the time. And I kind of joked about it when you introduced, me in that first episode. Because then at that time it was called Hare Krishna is in Britain podcast. And so I was joked that, well, I'm neither in Britain nor am I a Hare Krishna.
I
And I was kind
remember that now.
of,
A lot of the stuff
yeah,
you're saying is coming back to me, most
yeah.
definitely.
And I was kind of joking. Well, I said it jokingly, but at the time, I kind of did feel like that. Like I wasn't completely a devotee yet, but not long after being on the podcast, a series of very sudden changes happened that I'm very happy for the opportunity to share, and to share what all has happened since then.
Yes, I'm looking forward to hearing about that. It's kind of like we're going back to see how you're getting on, how you're doing. It's like a chat show, isn't it? A
Mhm.
talk show. But you just thank you for that kind of introduction. You just by you saying that's brought back a lot of things for me in terms of what we talked about. And you reminded me that you used to be a brahmachari, and you reminded me that the title of the first podcast we produced, I remember I called it something like I was a brahmachari and secretly transgender or
Yes.
something, because
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of get lots of attention. And that was, in terms of my first series of podcasts, that was one of the most highest viewed. And actually, I think just before Christmas, just gone, I revealed the top 10 podcasts of all time. And I think yours was certainly in the top 10. I think it was number nine, maybe eight. But for that at that point, and how young the podcast was at that point, it got a lot of views because most people had never well, a lot of people haven't met a trans person that they're aware of,
Mm.
and certainly they've never met a trans woman who used to be a brahmachari. um,
Right.
that
Or
they're
even a lot of devotees don't realize that there are transgender devotees at all.
absolutely, absolutely. And I remember way before our first, no, sorry, the summer of 2021, I did my first podcast on LGBT issues. And I interviewed a guy called Ranjiv, who's a gay man living in the UK. And I wanted to do a podcast about kind of gay rights. I think it was Pride Month or something. And firstly, I realized I only knew like five gay devotees.
Mm.
And then persuading any of them to talk openly was really tough.
Mhm.
So at that point, I realized how insular I had been with my friendship group and my social group. And now I can think of lots of trans devotees and gay devotees, LGBTQI devotees. When I say lots, I don't mean thousands, but there's a whole community that I just wasn't aware of. And quite rightly, why would people put their hand up and say, this is my label, this is this, this is that? I mean, and as you know, I've tried, I have interviewed quite a few trans guests on this show, and I've absolutely loved it because I'm really keen to give people a voice. So thank you for that recap. It certainly reminded me of a lot of the stuff that we talked about. And I remember at the time you were talking about things that you were struggling with. Just for context, can you remind me how long, for how long now have you been living as a woman?
I guess that would have started around the summer of 2019, so almost 5 years.
5 years this year. Um, and I kind of now remember some of the things that we talked about during that first episode. Um, so let's move forward. Tell me a bit about some of the things that have been happening. And my question, I guess, is what made you want to come back on the show for a second time? Most people don't want to have a second time with me because it's too tough. But why did you want to come back and do a podcast again?
Well, one of the biggest things that made me want to come back was the impact that I've seen of the first video. Um, I experience over and over and over again. I'll go to the temple, or I'll go to, especially like I'll go to a festival like Rath Yatra here in San Francisco, and I run into people all the time who they'll see me. Oh my gosh, I saw your podcast. And so many, especially LGBT devotees, but also non-LGBT devotees have told me how inspiring they found the first video because they had never heard someone talk so openly about that topic. Um, and yeah, they found it really inspiring in, their understanding of the issue of transgender, whatever, or especially in regard to LGBT devotees. I met many who told me that watching the first podcast um, gave them inspiration to find like a new kind of authenticity in how they conduct themselves within their devotee communities. And I've also met transgender devotees who said that they had gone away from their devotee community, or they had gone away from devotional service completely, and then they saw my podcast and it inspired them to return to their communities and return to devotional service. And I've met other transgender devotees who said that, they were like me, where they were kind of, hiding that they're transgender. But then after seeing my podcast, it inspired them to transition, and they've they feel that it's
Wow.
been like a really positive impact on their life in general and their devotional life specifically. And so I'm hoping that by coming on the podcast again, I might be able to reach more people who might find inspiration. Or, well, and also the things that I experienced after coming on the podcast in terms of my own devotional life, I think were really extraordinary. And I'm excited to share how I found Krishna's mercy in kind of reviving my devotional practice, and sharing what like an awesome experience that was, and hopefully that gives some inspiration for devotees as well.
Can you just, I think you just said this, but I guess I'm keen for you to reconfirm because it sounded quite a big statement to make. And I just wanted to kind of check that you said this, but that other devotees, uh, not due to, but after our first podcast together in August 2022, a number of devotees who were kind of struggling with their identity, uh, um, they made the decision to transition after seeing our first podcast.
Yeah. Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I should produce more podcasts with members of the trans community. That's quite something, because I produce these and I don't really have a clue who's listening. I mean, obviously, I can see the numbers,
Mhm.
but I don't know who they are, where they're from. And I never hear, I mean, unfortunately, most of the feedback I get is negative. I mean, in terms of, oh, you had that person, this and that, I've become quite thick skinned. But and I do hear positive things, which is great. But to hear this from you today, I just feel really quite touched by it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, and
that your story, I mean, it's so powerful and it's helping people make a positive difference in their lives.
yeah, and I want to clarify for any naysayers who might be watching that I'm not here saying like, oh yeah, like transgender, like woohoo, like it's so great being a transgender person, or like it's so great being, transitioning like this. You if you don't transition, you're like not a authentic devotee, or something like that. Or like, oh yeah, everyone should be patting transgender people on the back, or something like that. Um, I think people might get confused, and I can understand why. You see the rhetoric around LGBT issues in secular society, and maybe we'll dive into this a little bit more later. But there is in the LGBT community and like the LGBT pride movement this tendency towards like a pride about one's gender identity or one's sexual proclivities. Um, and like I can understand why, as like kind of a counter reaction to all of the negative things that LGBT people experience in our lives. It's kind of natural that if a pendulum's all the way on one side, then it's going to swing like far to the other as well. Um, and so some people might be hearing this and thinking that I'm saying like, oh, that it's some kind of devotional merit that someone transitions. I wouldn't say that per se, but what I have found in my own devotional life and what these other transgender devotees have told me they've found in their devotional life is that in transitioning, in being open about their gender identity or about their sexual identity, or in better understanding these issues, in terms of like devotees who are not trans or gay, they better understand others who do experience that. I think that it helps to bring a level of authenticity to one's spiritual life. Like if that is something that you need, like just like Prabhupada says early in his purports in the Bhagavad Gita, it's better to be an honest householder than a show bottle renunciate, right? And so for someone who is transgender and who needs to transition in order to be properly situated psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and socially, if you need that in order to be properly situated in your life, then not doing that is itself a kind of show bottle renunciation. If by not being authentic about that part of yourself, you are preventing yourself from being honest with others and having authentic relationships and presenting yourself in a real way, what's the difference between that and someone who's plagued by sexual desire taking sannyas, right? It's the same kind of a thing, right? And it will cause the same issues in the long run. And so that's where I'm coming from in feeling happy about the impact that I've seen, is that I believe that for many LGBT people, being honest and open and living in accordance with our conditioning is a necessary aspect of having an authentic spiritual life. And if we're not being authentic, then how are we going to reveal our mind and confidence to other devotees? How are we going to be able to receive it when other people reveal their mind and confidence to us? And how are we going to be honest with our spiritual masters, with our mentors, and with ourselves and with Krishna? Like, honesty is a really important part of devotional life, I feel. And if you read through Bhagavatam, you'll see so many examples of where Krishna um, says, or where sages say about Krishna, that Krishna likes people who are authentic, who are seekers of truth, and who are not duplicitous, who like live where they're really at and like try to move forward from there. And so that's where I'm coming from in this. It's not like, oh yeah, awesome, they're transgender. It's no, like they're realizing something that they need in order to be healthy in their spiritual life. And I'm happy to help facilitate that.
So let's now talk a bit about some of the things that you've experienced, that you've been through since we last spoke in August 2022. We've got a few things on our list of notes to cover today, which is really, really exciting. Should we talk a bit about I find the word integration difficult, but it's on the notes. Let's talk a bit about integration. How has it been integrating into your local temple community, if at all, since we last spoke?
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to kind of touch on first this bhakti breakthrough that I
We can do that
experienced.
first. We can do that first. I'm happy to do anything in any order you want to. So if you want to
Okay,
touch that first, it's fine. So
sure.
yeah, in terms of coming back on the show again and what's changed? What's changed since we last spoke?
Yeah, so let's see. So it was the middle of August when I was last on the show, and about a month after that, I had a very profound experience in kind of coming back to Krishna consciousness. So I had, over the years of being away from devotees and devotional service, gone through like a real kind of gauntlet of like difficult experiences, and I mean I'm not like unique in that, going through the COVID lockdown, that was hard on all of us. But like, for me, that was really especially difficult because I didn't have any spiritual kind of foundation to draw from. I mean, honestly, I would say in retrospect that when I was away from devotees, it was almost like I was a ghost. It was like I had no firm footing to stand on because, in materialistic people, or people who don't know anything about devotional service, right, they're identifying with their body. They're feeling that, yes, there is something out there in the material world for me to get, and I just have to go and go and get it. And they feel optimistic, right? That's like Maya puts us in that mentality where we can be thinking like that. But after practicing devotional service for so many years, even though I was trying to think like that, and I was trying to kind of be materially successful and find some material meaning in life, um, I couldn't, like, and everything that I did, it was like Krishna just didn't let it work. Like every single thing that I tried. And so after years of going through these kind of difficulties, I remember I called my mother one day, and I had just gotten at the end of a program that I had gone through, which I had hoped would kind of launch me into a new career, and that had gone horribly. And so I called my mother, and I was like, I got to I'm at the end of my program now, but I don't feel like I've been successful. I don't know if I can like go into this career now, given like the experiences that I've had, and like I just don't know what to do. And she was like, well, the what I told you to do the last time that you were in a position where you didn't know what to do, and what should go to Vrindavan.
I remember
And
that. I do remember that.
yeah.
You told me that before.
And I was like, again, I was like, go to Vrindavan. And she was like, yes, you should go back to Vrindavan. She was like, that's your home. Like I can see that's where you're grounded. That's where you like things make sense and where you find like rejuvenation. So why don't you go back to Vrindavan? She said, I'll buy you a ticket and just make the arrangements, and I'll send you there. And so that was supposed to happen, I think it was October 5th, so about a month and a half after when I was on the podcast. But like I said, at the time that I came on the podcast, I didn't really see myself as a devotee per se. I wasn't situated in any devotee community. All this stuff was kind of up in the air. My faith in Krishna was kind of like iffy. I just didn't know kind of I just didn't have like a standing per se. And so as the time was coming closer and closer for me to return to Vrindavan, I was feeling more and more uneasy about it. Um, because, even when I was away from devotional service, whenever I would tell people about Vrindavan, I would tell people, Vrindavan, it's not made up of matter. It's not a material place. Like this is a transcendental place. Somehow I retained some like faith in Vrindavan, even as I was struggling with my faith in devotional service. And so a few weeks before I was supposed to leave for Vrindavan, I remember sitting and I was thinking about it. And I remembered thinking like, Vrindavan is made up of bhakti. Like that is like the sum and substance of Vrindavan. Like that is what Vrindavan is composed of. That's what makes the Vrajvasis who they are. And so I remember just thinking like, how can I go back to Vrindavan if I don't know what my relationship is with bhakti? And and how can I know what my relationship with bhakti is without knowing what my relationship with Krishna is and my relationship with devotees? And so that became like a catalyst for me to start associating with devotees again. So a few days after, actually, I think just the very next day was a Sunday. And actually, if I remember correctly, I think it might have been Janmashtami. And or no, it was a week before Janmashtami.
After the first podcast we did, in
And this was like a couple weeks after
yeah,
the
yeah.
first podcast. And so anyways, so I went to my local temple, and yeah, I remember there was some kind of festival going on. And so I sat right up next to the altar, right in front of Shri Radha Gokulananda in Berkeley. Very, very beautiful deities. And there was kirtan going on, and I just remember like looking up at them and chanting Hare Krishna, and just this was the first time I had been in a kirtan in like 4 or 4.5 years.
Wow.
And I just like started crying. I could barely even like get the words to the Maha Mantra out. It was just so impactful. And after that, at the time I didn't have a job. I was unemployed, and I was doing some, job searching. So I was spending a lot of my time at home, just kind of with nothing to do. And so I started watching Namrasa's podcast, and actually became quite obsessed with it, because it kind of reminded me, or kind of reawakened my understanding of like what devotees are like. After kind of being away from devotees for so many years, having had bad experiences when I came out as transgender, I had kind of, in a way, like pigeonholed devotees into kind of this like box of, what is a devotee like? And I had some like negative kind of, you know, feelings in regard to that. And so, but watching Namrasa's podcast and hearing all these variety of devotees explain their experience in Krishna consciousness, explaining, what is important to them in devotional service, it was really like so eye-opening to me. And so then I started going to ISV, ISKCON of Silicon Valley, which is about an hour away from where I live. And His Grace Vaisheshika Guru is the head of that temple, and he is someone who I always found a lot of inspiration from. And so I like, as I was like going to the temple more and more and listening to the podcast, and then I started like listening to Krishna book like a lot. And it was just like all of a sudden, like all these things were kind of like erupting inside of me. And I started to have these experiences where I would I would be thinking about something that had bothered me over the years of my experiences in Krishna consciousness, or maybe some philosophical thing that I had come to have some misgivings about. And yeah, I'd be thinking about that thing, and then all of a sudden Krishna would remind me maybe of a verse from Bhagavad Gita, or maybe a line from one of Prabhupada's purports. And then every single time this would happen, I would go and I would open up, okay, open up Bhagavad Gita, find that verse, read it, or open up Bhagavatam, find the purport. And every single time, the thing that Krishna had implanted into my mind exactly answered this whatever misgiving it was that I had, been dwelling on for all these years. And and as I was doing this, also like, all these things were, philosophically, and all these experiences that I had as a brahmachari, positive experiences in devotional service, were like coming back. It was such like a magical experience. This, over the course of maybe a month, this was happening like over and over and over again. It was like every day was like a new adventure in devotional service. But there was one thing that I was feeling very uneasy about still, and I kind of mentioned this when I was last on the podcast, which was my relationship with my guru, His Holiness Devamrita Maharaj. You know, previously, when I was a brahmachari, and then also when I came out as transgender, I felt really nervous about coming out to him. And I think a lot of LGBT people feel like this, where, and devotees in general, right? We want to present our best self to our spiritual master. When we're in front of our spiritual master, we try and like be all, pukka, and oh yes, Gurudev, my sadhana is going great, and I'm doing this to, devotional service and that, and things are like so wonderful. And you want to like present, your best self to your spiritual master. Typically, often, this is something that I think, is important that we learn to overcome over time. Like we need to be able to reveal how we struggle to our spiritual masters as well. Um, but yeah, and so, I had never come out to Dave Amrita Maharaj, and then I had heard some rumors about him saying this or that about trans people. These rumors, by the way, were completely unsubstantiated, and I never tried to substantiate whether or not these rumors were true because, at the time I was not wanting to be around devotees when I heard these rumors. And so for me, it was kind of like a justification for not reaching out to him. And, I thought like, oh, like, I don't know, I guess it was a convenient excuse for me to not like be vulnerable and to like actually try and reconnect with my spiritual master. And so, but yeah, so I was going to ISKCON of Silicon Valley and hearing from Vaisheshika Prabhu, but I felt like I needed guidance as to how to move forward in my devotional life, how to overcome all these kind of new conditionings that I had picked up over the years that I had been away from devotees. And so one day after a Sunday feast, I went up to Vaisheshika Prabhu and I just kind of revealed everything to him. I told him all about, my experience being a brahmachari and being transgender and how much I had struggled in that and how I came out as trans and then I got so much bullying and, so much backlash to that, how I had gone away from devotional service. But now, like, I'm, coming back to devotional service and like, oh, I don't know what, I don't know what to do now. Like, please, like, give me guidance as to what to do. And he was so encouraging to me. I cannot like I could not overstate how thankful I am for how encouraging he was, and how he responded to me. There was no judgment at all from him. He all he had to say was, well, from what you're telling me, it sounds like as a brahmachari, you did so much service and like you should be happy for that. And now you're associating with devotees again. And I see in enthusiasm in you when you're listening attentively and when you're chanting Hare Krishna, there's really like are relishing the holy names. And so don't be like so hard on yourself. Like that bhakti creeper is still within you. Like you haven't tossed it out in the rubbish. Like it's still there. And so that brought me a lot of relief. But then he said, have you talked to your spiritual master about all of this? And so I told him, no, I hadn't. And I told him, well, I had heard these rumors about Dave Amrita Maharaj saying this or that. And Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj, or not Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj, Vaisheshika Prabhu, Vaisheshika Prabhu,
How can you mix the two up?
Vaisheshika Prabhu said, well, I've known Dave Amrita Maharaj for many, many years. And from what I've known of him, I don't think that he would say those kind of things that you heard that he had said. And so he encouraged me, you know, just just reach out to him, just send him an email and just see what happens. And so, I really wanted to I was feeling a lot of inspiration from Vaisheshika Prabhu, and I continue to. And so I wanted to please him. I wanted to show that I was willing to listen to his instructions and, to get his mercy in that way, and hopefully to get further guidance from him. If I wasn't willing to follow his instruction, then why would he give me more instructions, right? So I thought, you know, I thought, okay, like I don't really have a predisposition to want to write to Dave Amrita Maharaj. I was feeling very nervous about the idea, but I thought, okay, I'll do it because Vaisheshika Prabhu has told me that I should do this. And so I wrote a long email, and to be honest, when I read back over the email, the mood of the email was not very like disciple-like. But I just kind of laid everything out on the table. This is what I experienced. These are the concerns that I've had about our relationship. These are, the feelings that I have right now. I even said in the email, like, I'm only writing to you because Vaisheshika Prabhu told me to. And so I wrote that all, and then, of course, afterwards I was thinking very deeply about that email over the next couple days. And then finally, one day I had another one of these experiences where Krishna kind of reminded me of something, and that gave me a clue as to like how I should move forward in regard to this issue. And the clue that Krishna gave me, I was thinking about the email that I had written. I was thinking about Devamrita Maharaj, and then all of a sudden, a name popped into my mind, Ramachandra Puri. Now, if we've read Chaitanya Charitamrita, we know who Ramachandra Puri it was. He was a disciple of Madhavendra Puri, and when Madhavendra Puri was about to leave the world, Ramachandra Puri really displeased his spiritual master very greatly. Um, and then that led to Ramachandra Puri having this kind of Vaishnava aparad mindset. He was, became like a fault finder. He was always, going around and trying to set up devotees to seem like they weren't, good devotees, always finding faults. And Lord Chaitanya really avoided Ramachandra Puri's association. And so when this name Ramachandra Puri popped into my head, I thought, oh no, like, why is Krishna reminding me of Ramachandra Puri? And I was very nervous, but thought, okay, like, Krishna, I'm going to investigate why you're reminding me of him. And so I went on Database and searched for Ramachandra Puri, and the very first purport that I came across where Prabhupada was talking about Ramachandra Puri, he explained that not everyone takes initiation from their guru on the same level, that some people are true disciples who have actually surrendered to their spiritual master, but many others take initiation as a formality without really surrendering to their spiritual master and without really taking into their heart their relationship with their spiritual master. And when I read that, it was like a thunderbolt to my heart. I realized this is exactly exactly me. Like I'm being like Ramachandra Puri. I'm not being a sincere disciple. I have not been a sincere disciple for so many years. And I realized this email that I wrote was not an example of me being a sincere disciple either. And once I opened my kind of heart up to this idea, then again, Krishna started like reminding me of so many things, like the devotional service that I did when I was a brahmachari, and I was a pujari dressing the deities. That was a service that Devamrita Maharaj gave to me. And over the years that I was away from devotees, one of the things that Krishna always reminded me of that kind of kept me connected with, bhakti over the years was Krishna would remind me of these memories of dressing the deities and of like the ways that I experienced reciprocation from the deities. And so I have started to realize as Krishna was reminding me of these things that, I should really be so thankful to my spiritual master because he was the one who facilitated this. And although, as a brahmachari, I went through many difficulties and, maybe I felt some obligation to remain a brahmachari longer than I otherwise would have because, because Devamrita Maharaj gave me that service on the one hand, but then on the other hand, that service and the memories of that service were like a lifeline for me over these years of being away from devotees. And so not only did my spiritual master like give me the opportunity to do an immeasurable amount of devotional service for those years as a brahmachari. I dressed the deities thousands of times. I probably made tens of thousands of different dishes for the deities, for bhoga offerings. I offered probably millions of tulasi manjaris over the years. And I realized like that was all by the mercy of my spiritual master. And I hadn't really appreciated it at the time. But now that I've been away from devotees and now that I'm coming back to devotional service, I can see how not only was that such a boon at that time, but it also served as a great boon while I was away from devotees. And so, and I should really be so deeply thankful for that. And so I wrote again to Maharaj, to Devamrita Maharaj, and I explained all of these realizations that I had had, and I was like, Gurudev, I'm so sorry. Like I've not been a true disciple. I should have told you about these struggles that I was experiencing. Maybe if I had told you when I was a brahmachari, then maybe you could have helped me to have a better position and, be better situated in devotional service. But I didn't tell you. And then, when I encountered difficulties, then I turned away from you. And, I really like asked, begged for his forgiveness and expressed gratitude for all the devotional opportunities he had given me and how that had helped me so much. And that that was really like a key spark in like coming back to devotional service. And so I'm happy to say that I feel better situated as a disciple of His Holiness Deva Amrit Maharaj now than ever. Um, these kind of misgivings that I had or concerns about his opinions about transgender, this or that, I've learned to be baseless. And so I also want to make that very clear for anyone who saw the previous video. And I feel very happy to be and thankful to be a disciple of His Holiness Deva Amrit Maharaj.
And what is your relationship like now with your Guru Maharaj? And did you ever find out what his views were about trans issues and transitioning and issues like that?
Yeah, so well, so I guess first of all, my relationship with him is very good. I listen to his lectures constantly. I listen to his kirtans all the time. I find so much enlivenment from that and so much insight. Um, I have come to appreciate him and his devotional mood so much more than I ever did before. And I really hope for the opportunity to, serve him kind of in a more direct way, and I'm really looking forward, hopefully, for the opportunity to like be able to see him in person and talk to him and, see how I can serve him and how he would like for me to kind of situate myself in devotional service. In regard to the transgender issues, it's not really something that he talks about very much, but there was one lecture that I heard from him recently, which I found very impactful, where he was explaining how in material life, one of the like greatest symptoms of material life is that we're constantly in search of shelter. And so because we're away from the shelter of Krishna, we're trying to replace Krishna's shelter with the shelter of our bodies, of our friendships, of our parents, our family, our children. We're trying to find shelter in our hobbies. And then he said, and one really common thing that people especially do nowadays is that they try to find shelter in taking up so many identities. And then they think that if I just, the more identities that I kind of accumulate, the more better situated in life I'll be. And then if I tell other people about all these material identities that I have, then that will bring world peace and everyone understanding each other's identities. And he was kind of talking in a broad sense about like, you know, whether it's like racial identities or you know, national identities, or and then he also mentioned like sexual identities and gender identities. And his point was simply that, you know, this is no different from taking shelter of any other material thing, and that by doing this, we're setting ourselves up for failure, we're setting ourselves up for difficulties, for anxieties, for problems, because material things aren't what is really going to give us shelter. Material things aren't really what our soul is yearning for. And so, you know, we may like understand on one level these things about ourselves, but if we're taking these things so seriously and thinking that we're going to like find happiness and world peace in like our different upadis, our different material misidentifications, then you know that's not how it's going to work. Right? And you know, we see practically, you know, there's all these different movements, right, for this kind of justice or that kind of justice, or advocating about this racial group or that racial group, but like, is this actually like how we progress forward as humans, by like dividing ourselves into like more and more like little pieces, and then like, you know, having all these intricate identities and like intersections? Or do we find actual true satisfaction by finding what unites us all, which is that we are all servants of Krishna, and that, you know, our true interest is in serving Krishna together. And when I heard that, it was actually really really illuminating for me, because as we'll probably discuss soon, I've continued to experience many difficulties around my gender identity, not just in regard to like devotee communities, but just in general. And yeah, it really kind of tuned into like what I've been experiencing, and yeah, it gave me great insight. And yeah, I found it to be very helpful actually, and not like not transphobic or offensive, but just kind of a sober like reality. Right.
Sober, kind of rational, moderate, center ground
Yeah.
approach. I
Mhm.
think that's often, I think, the safe position to have, a moderate center ground position. So I'm quite encouraged to hear that, and I'm pleased to hear that your relationship with your Guru Maharaj has got better or improved. It sounds like by like 80, 90%, certainly by a lot since we last spoke
Mhm.
18 months ago. Before we move on to talk about some of the difficulties or the challenges that you've faced, do you want to talk a bit about kind of Zoom reading, the Zoom reading group you've been involved with, and maybe the home programs in the Bay Area? Just kind of give us some more of the kind of positive experiences that you've had.
Yeah. So there's a devotee who's pretty well known, I think, in ISKCON, named Mitrasena Prabhu. I had the great fortune of meeting him in Jagannath Puri back in 2017. We both kind of ran into each other there at the Toda Gopinath Mandir, and you know, became friends, and I stayed connected with him even over the years that I was away from devotees. And so as I was kind of coming back into the fold of devotional life, I was, you know, expressing on my social media that I really wanted more devotee association, not just, you know, going to the temple once a week, but, you know, that I really felt a deep need for regular like association, like daily. And he very kindly shared with me that he was running a Zoom reading group. And so we meet every day, except for Sundays, from 4 o'clock until 5:30 my time. and we just read through Prabhupada's books together. And we take turns reading. Sometimes we'll do like a paragraph at a time. Sometimes each person does like 2 sentences, and before moving on to the next person, we're frequently stopping to share our realizations, or oh, like I don't really understand why Prabhupada said this, or oh man, what Prabhupada said here maybe doesn't resonate with me like so much. And then we discuss it, or we share like, oh yeah, like Krishna's making this point in Bhagavad Gita, and yeah, I've really been experiencing that recently. And we just really like get together and support each other. There's devotees who are a part of the group who are new to devotional service, and on the other end, devotees who are Prabhupada disciples who've been steadily engaged in devotional service, for 50 years plus. There's devotees who aren't so maybe scripturally knowledgeable, and others who can quote shlokas out the wazoo. And it's just a really, really great environment. And we're all so supportive of each other and encouraging of each other. And it has been such a wonderful thing to be able to kind of tap into almost every single day. And I've found great enlivenment from that. And then in regard to home programs, so San Francisco, even though San Francisco is one of the first places where an ISKCON temple was started, uh, first it was New York and then San Francisco. Unfortunately, San Francisco does not at the time have a temple. So there's the Berkeley Temple, which is not far from San Francisco. It's just across the bay, but not necessarily the easiest to get to for everyone. And there is like a small preaching center within San Francisco. But as is the case in any devotee community, right? There are some devotees who maybe like to go to this temple or that temple, other devotees who, for whatever reason, don't go to the temple, but they do want to be with devotees, or they like to go to the preaching centers, whatever it is. And so what we try to do with these home programs is we try to gather up as many devotees as we can who are interested in getting together at people's homes and taking prasadam and chanting Hare Krishna and discussing about Prabhupada and his books and about Krishna. And it has been such a wonderful thing. Um, I I have gotten really into learning many different instruments in recent times, and I've even made some of my own instruments. And so I'll bring my instruments to these home programs. I've gotten to play flute and bansuri in kirtan recently. I have a guitar that I made. Actually, I'll show you. I've got it right
Please
here.
do. A guitar that you made. Whenever I think of people making instruments, I think of like milk bottles and stuff.
Yeah,
Wow, look at that. That's impressive.
yeah. So it's just a 4-string guitar, and it has an open tuning. So
This
it's
is like
like
it's wood. It's made of wood.
yeah, it's made of wood, and it's really cool. I really love it. It's a kind of
Wow.
a cool guitar.
Oh,
Um,
I couldn't do anything like that. I was terrible at like woodwork at school. I used to mess around massively. But that's really impressive, Suki, that you made that guitar from scratch.
yeah, I got like a kit of some like basic parts, and then I just kind of put it together. Yeah, and
That's
so
very impressive. Well done.
yeah, so these home programs have been really awesome. It's like such kind of a relaxed, casual thing where we all are able to kind of show up as we are. And we're all like-minded devotees. We call it the homies programs. Homie is kind of like a kind of a slang like relaxed kind of term for like our friendship with each other. And And then we also go on parikramas around San Francisco, because, Prabhupada did so many things in San Francisco. He visited Golden Gate Park so many times. There was the temple near Golden Gate Park, and, on Haight-Ashbury Street, you have, like where Janis Joplin lived. You have like the Avalon Ballroom is nearby where they did the benefit concert that gathered funding for the first temple. You have where the Grateful Dead lived. They also performed in the benefit concert. Um, and yeah, so, we just go on these like kind of relaxed trips to these different parts of San Francisco. Again, I'll bring my flute or my guitar, and we'll bring kartals, and we'll just like sit, in Golden Gate Park and have Harinam and talk about Prabhupada's pastimes in San Francisco. And it's, again, we really emphasize it being like kind of a relaxed thing where, it's not like you go out on Harinam and like, okay, everyone's got to be wearing dhotis and saris, and it's mridanga and kartals only, and you got to have the speakers, and you got to get like try and get the people in the crowd to dance with you, and like, this like whole high production sort of a thing. Like, no, instead we just, as a group of friends, just again come as we are, and we just talk about Krishna together and chant Hare Krishna together. And what I have experienced is that people who come by really, really appreciate it so much. With like these high production Harinams, a lot of the time people will kind of be turned off because it's like, oh, such like a kind of can kind of seem like a kind of theatrical sort of a
Yeah.
thing. And they don't want to like participate because it's like, oh, those people who are dressed kind of weird. Like I don't want to be associated with them. But, in our case, like we're all wearing, karmi clothes, street clothes, kind of just dressed how we would normally be dressed, playing different instruments and just chanting Hare Krishna together. And it's kind of sets a low bar of entry for anyone who wants to come and participate, whether that's for like a minute or they come and sit with us for an hour. And it's been really, really amazing. I've loved these programs so much, and yeah,
Just
quite.
for thank you for sharing that. That sounds wonderful, by the way. I feel like I should be living in San Francisco to come to these gatherings. Just for historical context, why is there now no ISKCON temple in San Francisco? Do you know that the answer to that?
I don't really know the answer to that. I believe it was in the mid 70s. The temple got moved to Berkeley.
Oh, okay.
I don't know exactly why that was, or kind of the context around it.
So it's
I,
not
I
it's not like the temple closed, it was just moved to another location.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So, because, originally at the Franklin Street Temple near Golden Gate Park, they were worshiping Jagannath, Baladev, and
Mm,
Subhadra.
mm.
Jamasundar had carved them on Haight-Ashbury Street. Um, and then those, I believe the progression is that they got moved to a temple in Mission, which is on like the east coast of San Francisco. Golden Gate Park is kind of centrally located. And so they got moved to like the eastern part of San Francisco. And then from there, we're moved to Berkeley. But yeah, I don't know why that was. I've heard rumors that Prabhupada wasn't very happy about it. Um, but yeah, I don't know the history so much about it.
Yeah, it's quite intriguing. Sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but it's always intriguing, particularly to find out that that change happened during Prabhupada's time.
Mhm.
And particularly a temple closure during Prabhupada's time is quite rare to hear. There is an example of one in the UK. There was an ISKCON temple in Edinburgh in Scotland that
Mhm.
closed during Prabhupada's time, and Prabhupada was really unhappy about it. So it's interesting to hear that something maybe similar happened in San Francisco.
Yeah,
Um,
and Prabhupada, like, okay, nowadays the temple in Berkeley is called New Jagannath Puri Dham. But Prabhupada he didn't call the temple in San Francisco New Jagannath Puri Dham. Prabhupada called the city of San Francisco New Jagannath Puri Dham. Prabhupada had a vision of San Francisco being, my understanding is that he said that San Francisco would be the first city in the US that was where like devotees were the majority of people in the city. And
Wow.
Lord Jagannath appeared in San Francisco, right? Malati found Lord Jagannath in like an import shop and brought Lord Jagannath to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, immediately offered his obeisances to Lord Jagannath. And then that was the inspiration for Prabhupada instructing Shyamasundar to carve Lord Jagannath on Haight-Ashbury Street. And so, and then, Prabhupada also, he really loved Golden Gate Park. He really loved Stowe Lake, which is called Blue Heron Lake now, in the middle of Golden Gate Park, and would go on morning walks there all the time when he was in San Francisco, at least. So yeah, Prabhupada really loved San Francisco. It's like specifically. And so, yeah, I do find it kind of curious that it got moved out of San Francisco. And I wish that I knew more of the history of exactly why that is. But for better or for worse, that's what has happened. And that's actually part of the vision that myself and some other devotees have, is that we hope that we might be able to start an ashram or a temple in San Francisco and get that going again. Because San Francisco is really, it's full of people who are looking for change, who are looking for something new, and who see the problems in the world and are trying to find a solution, but failing because they're not finding Krishna. And but we can help them find Krishna. And so I want to be a part of that effort to extend those opportunities to the residents of San Francisco.
Well, good luck. I hope it goes well. Whenever I've never been to the United States, but whenever I think of San Francisco, I think of kind of modern, liberal, progressive place where people are exploring alternative lifestyles and alternative diets, and it's a place where people are open-minded.
Mhm.
And certainly California is well, politically it's quite progressive anyway, isn't it, California as a state? So I hope it goes well, but keep praying and chanting the holy names. Sticking on the topic of kind of temples, can we talk a bit about integration now, in terms of how has it been for you? What are your experiences? What have been your experiences of integrating into your local temple communities?
Sure. So, in the Bay Area, I kind of have three opportunities for devotional community. There's, again, like I was mentioning, the preaching center in San Francisco.
Mm,
There's
mm.
the Berkeley Temple, and then there's ISKCON of Silicon Valley, which is about an hour away from me, but it's still within the San Francisco Bay Area. And so at first I was mostly attending ISKCON of Silicon Valley because I wanted to hear from Vaisheshika Prabhu. But over time, ISV is such an amazing temple. All the devotees there are so deeply inspired by Vaisheshika Prabhu. I remember going to one festival, and then afterwards everyone was sitting outside and taking prasadam, and like all the kids of the community were all sitting together, and I was sitting nearby, and someone came and asked them, what is it that inspires you in devotional service? Like, what is it that makes you want to practice devotional service and be so involved in the temple? Every single one of them said Vaisheshika Prabhu. Every single one of them. And you know, I mean, I've had so many experiences of seeing how like these devotees are so fired up, and they like everything is running at that temple like to the T, like and so whenever I go there, as awesome as it is to be there, I feel like well, where can I contribute? It sometimes feels hard to like kind of find my footing in like how I can be of service. And it's okay to like just go to the temple and like enjoy the Sunday feast, and like get benefit from hearing from the speaker and seeing the deities and participating in the kirtan. But for me, what I really want to do is to like actually be involved and like be able to serve and help out in some way. And so after going to ISV for many months, I started to feel like, maybe this isn't where like my service is needed. And so I started going to the Berkeley Temple, and the Berkeley Temple has many wonderful qualities, not to downplay it at all. But, things don't necessarily go as smoothly all the time there. And again, not trying to criticize anyone, and there's a lot of complicated history around the Berkeley Temple, which, I don't understand all of it, and no need to like kind of dig up all of that. But I when I go to the Berkeley Temple, I see a lot of opportunities where I could be of service. They need people who can lead kirtans. They need pujaris. They need people who can give classes. They need. There's a lot of people who go to the temple who are kind of pious Indians, but they don't seem to really understand so well. And even, I've heard many of them say themselves that they don't really understand so well about Prabhupada or about ISKCON or about Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And so I started to go to the Berkeley Temple every week instead of ISV, in the spirit of hoping that I would be able to, gradually be engaged in these different services and be able to be an asset to the community in that way. Um, and it seemed like things were going well. I got some opportunities to lead Gora Arti at the beginning of, that's how they always begin the Sunday feast, is with Gora Arti, which I love. I absolutely love that. I've come to absolutely love the Gora Arti song. And as a brahmachari in San Diego, it wasn't something that we really ever sang. So I didn't know it when I started going to the Berkeley Temple, but once I learned it, and I started listening to it all the time when I was at work, and I really came to like love that song a lot. And so I was so happy to get the opportunity to lead Gore Arti a few times. Um, but then unfortunately, see, it must have been about 6 months ago. Um, I going to the temple, sometimes you need to use the restroom naturally. And at ISV, they have like single person restrooms. So there was no worries about like gender, this or that. But at the Berkeley Temple, it's not like that. There's the women's restroom, and then there's the men's restroom, which is actually like within the brahmachari ashram. You have to like walk through the brahmachari ashram to get to the men's restroom. And I had been using the women's restroom, and again, like I'm aware of why someone could feel concerned about that. I'm not naive in that regard. Not everyone's going to understand about transgender people. Some, different people could be concerned for different reasons. I can understand that. I'm sympathetic to that, and I'm not like devoid of like it. Anyways, I get it, right? And so I really made a point of trying to be considerate of everyone else in how I would go about doing that. Um, Try and make sure that no one was in the restroom when I would go in there. Um, and, I would either do it like when I first got to the temple, or at the very end of the Sunday feast when most people had left. Just trying to be considerate of whatever concerns anyone might have, because I'm not there to push any agenda on anyone. I'm not there to make anyone uncomfortable. I'm just there like anyone else, trying to, be around devotees and do some service, and, you know, just be like anyone else. But unfortunately, I guess someone saw me using the women's restroom, complained to the temple president. That led to him communicating to me that he didn't want me to use the women's restroom anymore. And so ever since then, I've not really felt so comfortable going to the Berkeley Temple because, it doesn't feel like the right restroom for me to use. He wants me to use the men's restroom, but I don't feel like it would be right for me to be walking through the Brahmachari ashram wearing like a sari and makeup. Sometimes when this whole issue came up, there was a sannyasi who had been staying at the temple for almost 2 months. And so I just pictured like going into the men's restroom and then the sannyasi is in there. And the sannyasi also he referred to me as Mataji, and so like I just, thought about how awkward that would be for both him and I. And also, Prabhupada, he wrote a letter to one transgender disciple, and he told this disciple, he said, whichever it is that you want to go with, male or female, like whichever fits, then just do that dharma. If you feel like a woman, then just do the dharma of a woman, present yourself as a woman, and then just, go on with your devotional service. And he said, but don't, he said, but don't mix it. Like, don't sometimes be acting like a woman or presenting as a woman, sometimes as a man, because he said that doing that would have a probability of creating a disturbance for others. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from in not wanting to go to the Berkeley Temple, because if I was to use the men's restroom, then I would feel like I'm, kind of mixing, right? Like I'm not just situating myself on one side of the gender spectrum, like Prabhupada instructed this disciple to do. And I think, most of the people in the congregation do seem to accept me as female. And so if I were to start using the men's restroom, I think that would also cause like discomfort for them. And also it would be uncomfortable for me. So yeah, so I've just been not going to the Berkeley Temple. I've just been going to ISKCON of Silicon Valley, which, no loss per se, but I really would like to have the opportunity to, kind of achieve the ideas of how I could be of service to the Berkeley Temple that I had been striving for previously. And it was really disappointing for me when this whole thing came up because, I had really invested so much time and energy into trying to, you know, become a part of the community, and it seemed like it was going well until all of a sudden this kind of fell upon me. So what to do? It is what it
So
is.
that was 6 months ago.
Yeah.
I do actually remember reading that on your Facebook page, on your social media platforms, about how distressing it was.
Mhm.
And I think I remember reading that you had certainly appealed in the sense you were appealing to the temple president to change his mind or to reconsider. What did happen with that in terms of the dialogue with him? I mean, how
Yeah,
did that go?
I was never really able to have a dialogue per se with him. I talked to Vaisheshika Prabhu about the issue, and I guess he talked to the temple president and tried to encourage the temple president that, just let Sukhi use the women's restroom. Like it's not really that big of a deal, kind of a thing. And so then the temple president came to me and talked to me about it. Um, but it wasn't really a dialogue so much as him reaffirming his conviction that I should use the men's restroom. And, you know, I guess like another element of it for me is that I, Lord Jagannath has put this devotee in the position that he's in of temple president. And has kept him in that position. I don't know what Lord Jagannath's reason is for doing so, or what Lord Jagannath's intentions are. But he's situated in his devotional service in that capacity at the Berkeley Temple, and who am I to like disturb him by like trying, creating some kind of ruckus, trying to go against what he said. I think better to just accept his decision, and just okay, if that's not the place for me to serve right now, then service isn't restricted to one temple or another. So I just have to find some other way.
Mm. And it's great to hear that there are other opportunities for you in terms of the Silicon Valley Temple, in terms of the devotee community in the Bay Area. So that's great to hear. But for a lot of devotees around the world, there aren't endless ISKCON temples or Hare Krishna temples in towns and cities and villages across the world. And a lot of people will have to put up with, sounds a bit negative, doesn't it? Have to put up with the local situation at their temple. And I'm just trying to imagine a trans devotee, using this as an example, a trans devotee who isn't that fortunate that their local temple is the closest in 10-hour drive or something, or the only one in that country. In some countries in Europe, for example, let's use France, for example. There's quite a lot of Hare Krishna temples in the UK, but in France, there's only 2 ISKCON temples. There's another one that's not ISKCON, but there's 2 that are ISKCON. And if you're not satisfied with those, France is a big country. You've got no kind of temple saver opportunities. So I mean, it kind of sounds like you've kind of dealt with it, or you're learning to deal with it, and you've kind of moved on. But I just find it very sad. Uh, you were going to that temple. You are a woman, so you're dressed as a woman. You're wearing a sari and makeup. I mean, the last thing you should be doing is walking through the Bramacari ashram to go to the loo. I mean, I find that actually more bizarre than anything else. And he thought that was reasonable. I just find that very bizarre personally.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to criticize him. Like we all have our conceptions based on our conditioning, the kind of consciousness we have, the experiences that we've had. None of us are like objective seers of anything. And so, if his place that he's coming from brings him to this particular conclusion, then I can't just change that by argument or by getting like really worked up about the issue. Like he will have to come to different realizations or whatever, or I will have to come to different realizations or whatever over time. It just is how it is. But this is like one reason why I think that devotees really need to like learn to lean on home programs. If you have a home program, you don't have to worry about temple politics. Especially for LGBT devotees, you don't have to worry about what bathroom to use if you're going to a home program. You don't have to worry about this or that. You just find a group of like-minded devotees and you just get together and chant Hare Krishna together and read together and take prasadam together. If you do it with like-minded fixed up devotees, you'll find like those programs, in my opinion, are better than going to the Sunday feast. Like there's really so much nectar in having home programs. And Prabhupada, in his purports, there are many parts where he emphasizes householders have a duty to do home programs. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he emphasized home programs. Bhakti Vinod Thakur wrote like a whole detailed explanation of how to do home programs. So I think that we in the Western Gaudiya Vaishnava world need to learn how to tap into this. And I think that by doing that, you can really like circumvent a lot of these issues, and not just issues about like bathroom or whatever, but then there's also like political issues, or maybe you just don't feel comfortable with a certain power structure or whatever. You don't need to deal with that. you don't need to be discouraged by the situation and within the ISKCON bureaucracy where you live, or the GBC, whatever, this or that. Like, you have the power to like take a hold of your devotional practice and your experience of devotional community by doing home programs. And like, we got to start doing it.
Mm,
It's
mm.
something I feel passionate about because I've found so much nourishment in these home programs. And then also like the reading groups. That's another thing. Like, it's not hard to like get together with some like-minded devotees and read Prabhupada's books. You just got to do it. It's just a little bit of organization, and then once there's some momentum, then it just keeps going.
Can we now talk about something else which is really positive? I'm going to try and link what I'm about to say to point four. And the viewers won't have a clue what I'm talking about, but Sukhi and I have a list of things to go through. So we're going to try and move on to point four. I think one of the great things that Sukhi's been doing over the last 18 months is really being a voice for and an ab or a voice for the trans community, the global trans community in the Hare Krishna movement. And yourself and other devotees such as Radha Manjari and others are supporting trans devotees on a whole range of issues. And one of the things that I think you've done well is you've certainly online, you've brought that community together, and you've set up a Facebook group. Am I allowed to say the name of the group? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
so there's two groups.
two
One of
groups.
them is called Transgender Hare Krishnas. Oh, and by the way, I also want to clarify that this was all Radha Manjari's doing. Like, I'm one of the administrators
Yes,
in these
yes.
groups, but it's really Radha Manjari who has been like at the forefront of this. And actually, I'm like not very involved in these groups, except as like approving posts here and there. But um, so one is Transgender Hare Krishnas, which is a group just for transgender devotees. And then there's another called Transgender Hare Krishnas and Allies, which is for transgender devotees and devotees who are not transgender, but who are sympathetic to transgender devotees, who want to support trans devotees, who maybe want to learn more about how they could support trans devotees. And we just try to like bring
Mm,
together a community of like-minded devotees in within this group.
mm. And that's the group I'm in.
Mhm.
And I love it actually because I don't have time to respond to hardly any comments, but I get notifications and I'm learning a lot. And certainly online, I'm meeting lots of devotees. And I really appreciate being allowed to be part of that small community. And yeah, for a whole number of reasons. And I'm sure that Radha Manjari will be listening to this podcast. And Radha Manjari, the door is always open for you to be a guest on this podcast. I know we have had some dialogue before, but we haven't yet set up that date for the recording. So you are absolutely welcome to be a part of this. So the reason I wanted to just put that as a context, talk about the Facebook activities of the trans community in the Hare Krishna movement. I want to then talk about something else, and I'm not sure how to bring it in. um,
Yeah, well, I can introduce it.
um,
Oh,
no, let me do it. Let me do it. I'm gonna
okay.
try and do it. I'm gonna try and do it. So, it's quite interesting in a kind of Freudian slip. You've already mentioned Bhakti Vikasa Swami in this
Yes.
podcast, and you couldn't get two gurus that were like poles apart. And I don't want to offend either of them by saying that. There's a comical side of that as well. But obviously, Bhakti Vikasa Swami has a certain approach to doing things. One of the things I really like about ISKCON actually is if you look at the leaders, the gurus, the sannyasis, there's a whole broad range. They're a broad church. There are some that are kind of quite liberal, and some that are quite conservative, and some that are in the middle. And I think that's a good thing to have that broad church, and they will have different views on different issues. Most of us, I think, would agree that Bhaktivedanta Swami is in the more kind of socially conservative wing of the Hare Krishna movement. And he obviously has certain views on trans issues, on transitioning, on probably sexuality and gender identity. And he obviously he produced a film recently expressing his views on trans issues and trans identity in response to finding out about this Facebook group. So I just thought, well, that's a big well done for getting a senior ISKCON guru's attention. I think it's a good thing. So tell us a bit about what Bhakti Vikasa Swami said in his video.
Sure. So I want to preclude this by kind of giving credit where credit is due, so to speak. Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj, I really respect him in so many ways, and I really do value kind of his approach to how he encourages his disciples to practice Krishna consciousness and how he tries to bring certain things to light that are going on within ISKCON or the broader Gaudiya Vaishnava community. And so I wanted to first of all share some appreciation of him, because I do think that he is a great devotee in many ways, and I have personally found a lot of inspiration from him over the years. So Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj, well, when I was a brahmachari, the temple president, who is also the head brahmachari, was a disciple of Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj. And so every once in a while, Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj would come and visit San Diego. Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj was actually the first sannyasi that I ever met. He came and visited, I think it was only like a week or two after I joined the brahmachari ashram, actually. And he made a really big impression on me. You know, he is such like a staunch and like fixed up devotee. And while on the one hand being like very strict, and he speaks very strongly about many issues that he's passionate about, on the other hand, like in his personal dealings, he is actually an extraordinarily humble devotee, and also extremely enthusiastic when it comes to Krishna Katha and when it comes to chanting Hare Krishna. I can remember so many times of him coming to Mangalarti, in San Diego, when I was a brahmachari. And as like all of us brahmacharis are like struggling to like even stay awake through the Mangalarti Kirtan, Maharaj, dancing and chanting and encouraging everyone, to like join in with them. And then I remember one time he was asked to give Bhagavatam class. So he had been staying at the temple for a few days, and then he came to the morning Bhagavatam class. No one had asked him to give Bhagavatam class that day, but they just kind of threw it on him at the last minute. And yeah, he normally our classes would be like 45 minutes long. He ended up speaking for like 2.5 hours. Not be like he just lost track of time. Like he was just so absorbed in Krishna Katha. And also he's like such a greatly learned devotee. He, knows Shastra so well. And in the interactions that I had with him, also he was very kind towards me, very encouraging towards me. This was when I was a brahmachari. And yeah, even I remember one time, that first time that I met him, he was there was one day he was sitting in a room taking prasadam, and I didn't know that he was in there, and I went into the room to take prasadam, and so his disciples, were coming in and out with, making fresh chapatis and, serving different preparations and this and that. And so I go in and I realize what's going on, and just like, oh my gosh, like I'm not supposed to be in here. And so I go to leave, and Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj insisted that I sit down with him, and that his disciples serve me instead of him.
Wow.
And yeah, so I just wanted to like set that stage first of all, because while I don't agree with the things that he said in this video, and I find it surprising some of the like kind of approach to this topic that he had in this video. I don't want that to seem like I just like hate him, or that, you know, I don't see the great qualities that he has as a devotee. And even like the mood that he had in making this video, like I even appreciate where I think he's coming from in doing this. Um, so what happened was that Radha Manjari had put an invitation to the Transgender Hare Krishnas and Allies Facebook group on a public Hare Krishna page. And I guess one of Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj's disciples saw that advertisement, took a screenshot of it, which only had like a couple sentence description of what the group was, and sent that to Maharaj. And so this whole video, is about 35 minutes long, was a response to that screenshot of the Facebook group. And unfortunately, Maharaj said many very critical things, um, which I found very surprising because, again, what was this all based off of? It is literally just a description of a couple, like one or two sentences. But he made a 35-minute video based on one or two sentences. And Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj never tried to reach out to anyone in the group to like find out what the group was about before making this video. So again, like he was not informed in making this video, which I find concerning because this isn't just like some non-devotee thing, which of course, if we're going to criticize anything, we should try and like understand it right before we criticize it, because otherwise we just come across as like fanatical or ignorant. Um, but especially when it comes to criticizing something that another devotee is doing, I think it's my understanding from all the education in bhakti etiquette that I've had is that it's really important that we're careful in our dealings with devotees, and that we don't just criticize unnecessarily, that we don't just like make us, you know, wild assumptions about devotees, because Krishna doesn't appreciate that. All devotees are dear to Krishna. And so if we're rough in our dealings with devotees, then Krishna doesn't take kindly to that, according to my understanding. Um, and so when I was informed about this video, I went and watched it, and Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj says many things like, it's been a while since I've watched the video. Maybe you have a better memory of some of the points that Maharaj made, we could kind of discuss through.
Yeah, I think if I'm being blunt, Maharaj was being quite degrading to the trans community, and I think probably the best word is dismissive, in terms of dismissing it as some kind of fad or phase,
Mm.
or actually, you know, we're not these bodies. So if you're born into a body that you don't like, you just have to put up with it. You just have
Yeah,
to tolerate it. And actually, that you really should be kind of living in the with the gender that you were born with. And he was very much critical of the trans community as being very attached to the body or bodily identification.
yeah,
And it was what I know it's a bit of a political term, quite a conservative approach to um, how some people might view kind of transsexuality,
mm,
and I just found it quite inappropriate in terms of the way that the Bhakti Vikasa Swami was referring to the trans community, of which may be small, but is doesn't mean it's not insignificant. The trans
yeah,
community, and
yeah. And then he was also talking about like, you know, in devotional service, we have to learn to be self-controlled.
yes,
And he was like, and I know the transgender Hare Krishnas aren't teaching about self-control. It's like, well, Maharaj, how do you know that? because you don't know anything about us,
Mm.
frankly, except for a 1 or 2 sentence description. So, you know, actually, to clarify in terms of that, in our the whole point of the Transgender Hare Krishnas and Allies group is only to give each other encouragement in practicing devotional service at whatever level we are at. We're not encouraging people to engage in one illicit activity or another. We're not encouraging people to have one kind of
Mm.
bodily identification or another. It's just, okay, we have a commonality between us. So let's get
Mm.
together and
Mm.
encourage each other in devotional service.
Mm.
And I really wish that Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj had just reached out and like tried to see what we were, instead of making these assumptions that like, oh, they're encouraging bodily identification, they're encouraging people to engage in this kind of sinful activity or that kind of sinful activity. I remember there was one in the description of the group, there was one term intersex, which was mentioned. Intersex means someone who's born with a physical body that is ambiguous in like it's whether it's male or female. So someone might have like different sexual characteristics that align with like male or female together instead of it being clearly one or the other. But Bhakti Vikasa Maharaj saw intersex, not knowing what that meant, and like Maharaj could have just looked it up on Google
Mm.
or asked a disciple to look it up, you know, in the dictionary or whatever. It would have been really easy for him to clarify what that meant. But instead, he again just gave a kind of critical, dismissive thing like, oh, intersex. I can only imagine what kind of like devious stuff that is. It's like, okay, well, you can imagine whatever you want, but just because you imagine something doesn't mean that what you're saying has any
Mm.
truth to it, right? And so like why not just try and understand where we're coming from? You know, that was what was really surprising about it to me. Like it would have been taken minimal effort for him to have at least tried to like reach out to us. And I'm sure any of us would have been happy to talk to him. I would still be happy to talk to him, um, and explain to him what the group is about. And then if he had, you know, questions or concerns, I would be happy to hear
Mm.
whatever that is. But, you know, to just give this kind of public address condemning what we're doing without knowing anything about it, it was just, I found it very unfortunate.
And I think certainly there was from Maharaj there was a misunderstanding, and you find this often in a lot of kind of conservative circles. There's a misunderstanding that someone who might be trans or transitioning um, uh, uh, is attached to sex.
Mm,
It's all about sex. I have a trans friend here in the UK, and she was born male and now lives as a woman. And she says it's not about sex. It's not even about the types of people that I find attractive. It's just about me and the
mm,
life that I feel that I should be living, that I feel that works right for me. It's not about
mm.
sex and attachment to sex at all. And
Yeah,
and
and quite counter to that, studies have actually found that transgender people are much more likely to be asexual, not have any sexual attraction, or to be hyposexual, meaning that they have much lower than average like sexual appetite. And we find this in the Kama Sutra also. It explains that transgender people are more inclined to be celibate, um, or in some cases they have monogamous relationship, but typically without like sexual
mm,
involvement.
mm,
So it's actually quite like the opposite. You know, transgender people are more inclined to practice that regulative principle, whereas on the other hand, we find in the householder community, right, a lot of, again, not to criticize anyone, but a lot of householders express difficulty when it comes to no illicit sex or only having sex for the purpose of procreation. And again, like in terms of bodily identification and like bodily attachment, okay, why does someone leave the brahmachari ashram to become a grihasta? Typically, it's not because they're transcendentally attracted to engaging in devotional service in the capacity of a grihasta. It's because they have an attachment to sexually engage with another person, right? And they have bodily identification, which is resulting in that attraction to those activities. And they choose their spouse based on their body, right? Like they're not saying, okay, well, we're not the body, so my wife is going to be a man, right? Like, right? Or, whatever. Like, or, oh, these
Mm.
are my children. Okay, well, that's a bodily identification also. They're not your children. You just have a bodily connection with those children. So, you know, I I just think that it's unreasonable to like point the finger at like the transgender community specifically or the LGBT community specifically about these kind of things because it's not only transgender or LGBT people who have bodily identification that we're working through, but we all start on the path of spiritual life from some point. If it's like the alphabet, maybe someone is starting at point A, maybe someone's at D or L, and we're trying to get to Z, but you can't just artificially jump to, X because you heard, okay, well, we're not the body, right? Like you have to authentically progress along this path. And again, going back to like what I was talking about in the beginning of the video, um, if you're not being authentic, then you're not going to be able to have authentic relationships. You're not going to be able to get the
Mm.
mentorship that you need to move forward progressively. You're going to cheat yourself and hold yourself to standards that maybe aren't reasonable for you, or try to go about dealing with your conditioning in a way that doesn't work for you. Um, you know, Better is to just be honest with yourself and others about where you're at. And we in ISKCON need to learn to be accepting of others and where others are at. Often is the case that when someone becomes a devotee, when someone becomes, okay, like I identify as a devotee, I'm chanting rounds or whatever, then we think like, okay, you're not a legitimate devotee unless you take up practices A, B, and C, and you're engaging in this way, and you're okay. If I remember one friend of mine, he went to a concert for a band that he was really into, and then the local GBC went and like gave him a whole talking to about like, oh, like why would you do something materialistic like that? Don't you know we should just be engaging in devotional service? Or same when I came out as transgender, people came to me and said, "Oh, Sukhi, that's not pure devotional service. What are you doing? Like this whole transitioning thing, that's not pure devotional service." It's like, well, I'm sorry if you were mistaken in thinking that I'm a pure devotee, but I'm not. And so, like, you shouldn't be surprised to see me doing something that's not pure devotional service. You should be surprised to see me doing pure devotional service because I'm not a pure devotee. And you're not a pure devotee, also, by the way. Like, sorry to burst your bubble.
Mm.
Like, like, we need to, like, we need to be realistic, like, and not just like fanatics.
Before we kind of finish off with number five and discuss number five on our list, can I just ask you a question about the trans community in the Hare Krishna movement in terms of how big is it? What size, what size is it? I mean, certainly in the group that I'm in, there's quite a lot of members.
Hmm.
I I'm just wondering, do you or Radha Manjari have those types of figures in terms of the number of trans devotees? I guess it depends
Um,
how we define trans and how we define devotee. I get that semantics are not always that straightforward. Um,
Yeah, well, in our Facebook group, we have 35 members right now. That's in the transgender Facebook group.
hmm.
Of course, not every transgender devotee is within our Facebook group, so who knows like how many there are more broadly. Um, I mean, if I had to guess, I would say that probably like the same percentage of people who are transgender in the world in general are probably transgender within ISKCON, because ISKCON takes in people from all different walks of life. Maybe there's less who are open about it. Um, and so it might seem like there's less than on average. But actually, studies have shown that LGBT people have a higher likelihood of being spiritually inclined than like the average population. Just most of us don't have a spiritual
Mm.
foundation that we can kind of connect to, or a spiritual community that we can connect to. Um, so anyways, all that to say,
Yeah.
like it's hard to measure.
Yeah, there's a new, I think you might have seen on Facebook, there's a new kind of LGBT support group based in the UK that's for the Hare Krishna community. A devotee living near Cambridge contacted me about 2 weeks ago uh, just to tell me about it and to help ask if I would help promote it, which of course I was happy to do. So that's been on social media for a while. And I had a message from him, I think it was yesterday, to say there's been a lot of interest, I think more than he expected. So that's really good. And there's quite a few devotees in the UK who are very public about being part of the LGBT community. I know that's been very supportive to others who aren't so public for different reasons. Okay, let's move on now. I'm conscious you and I've been chatting for way over 2 hours, but this recording is almost 2 hours long, which is fine. There's also a bit of a time difference as well, which because I'm in the UK, you're in California. Can we get on to our kind of last discussion point now about the need for ISKCON to actually, hopefully, become more of a place where anyone sincere can find spiritual nourishment, encouragement, and guidance. Um, Judging by that note of yours, you feel that ISKCON at the moment isn't a place where everyone can necessarily find sincere spiritual nourishment, encouragement, and guidance. How far away from that? So we want it. We want like what Prabhupada wants for ISKCON to be a home for everyone, a house for the whole world. How far away from that do you think we are in terms of trans issues, trans acceptance?
It's really hard to say, and especially given like the variety of cultural contexts in which ISKCON takes place. Um, like, if I were to go to India, I'm sure that my experience would be different than in America, and even different parts of India I would experience differently. Um, Different parts of America, I know I would also experience differently. Um, it could also take some effort for someone who's transgender to become accepted within their devotee community, like was the case for me with the San Diego temple. It took some time for, things to be worked out where now I feel welcome there. And actually, I have been thinking about moving back to San Diego because I really do miss serving Radha there. Um, so yeah, it's kind of hard to give an exact metric of how far away we are in ISKCON from being a place where any sincere person can find nourishment and guidance and engagement. Um, but I think that this is something that ISKCON needs to like turn its view, turn its like viewfinder towards, turn the scope towards this point that, ISKCON started off as a place where anyone could come, right? Like these hippies weren't some like people who were fixed up in like detachment to their body and who like were fixed up in the four regulative principles. Prabhupada didn't even tell the first initiates about the four regulative principles until after he had initiated them. you know, Prabhupada's first disciples, before he initiated them, they would go to his programs, and then they would go to the like coffee shop and get coffee and donuts, with eggs in them. And then I guess Prabhupada caught wind of that and followed them once and was wagging his finger through the window. But Prabhupada's mood wasn't that you have to be a certain kind of person or you have to be at a certain level of realization or fixedness in devotional service in order to be a part of ISKCON. Prabhupada was very liberal in his spreading of Krishna consciousness to everyone. And although he was strong on certain points in his books and in his lectures, when it came to like personal interactions, you see a different side. You know, like for instance, there were some gay devotees who, Prabhupada had at first encouraged, like, okay, if you could be married to a woman, then that would be the best thing. But then when they said no, like we can't do that, then he said, okay, then just find a nice boy who you can be with and just support each other in Krishna consciousness. That's the main principle. Like we just need to be supporting each other in Krishna consciousness. Whatever point someone is at, we just got to find ways to encourage them and give them a place where they can go to hear from authorities. We need to give them encouragement to engage in devotional service, to take up whatever level of practice they're able to take up, and then accept that, okay, maybe this person isn't ready to chant 16 rounds every day and follow the four regulative principles strictly. Maybe they're not ready for initiation. Maybe they aren't so fixed in this philosophical point or that philosophical point, but that's okay. Like we're not like, again, we need to like not just be like fanatics who are condemning anyone who isn't at a certain point along the path, and instead realize that everyone is going to come to us at a particular point in their spiritual journey, and that the bhakti path, the Gaudiya Vaishnavism, is a means that anyone can take up from whatever position they're in, from whatever point they're along in their spiritual journey, and they can benefit from it. It's not something where you have to fit into a certain mold in order to be, a bona fide devotee. Like whoever takes up chanting of Hare Krishna, whoever takes up chanting of reading, or whoever takes up reading Prabhupada's books, whoever does some service, they're going to get benefit. And it's a disservice, I think, if we create an environment in which people feel dissuaded from taking up those practices to whatever degree they're able to from where they're at.
Do you think a lot of ISKCON's issues around lack of acceptance is maybe a generational issue or a cultural issue? Mostly all of the leaders of ISKCON are of a certain age, a certain generation, and a certain also a certain cultural background where you know they might not have met a trans woman before or a gay devotee before, or they might not have met two devotees that live together but are not married.
Mm-hmm.
And generally there's, because ISKCON is coming from a place of not everywhere, but in a lot of its communities around the world, kind of very kind of socially conservative base, it's therefore very difficult to move away. And I'm not saying to become ultra liberal necessarily, but to become just more accepting. A lot of I'm actually not being negative, I'm trying to be positive here, but a lot of the sannyasis in ISKCON, have never experienced necessarily relationships
Right.
in an intimate way, or in a kind of
Yeah.
lovey-dovey way. So there is that lack of awareness and understanding of where people are just coming from in their lives.
Yeah, I think that could be a part of it, definitely. Although, and my experience has been that, and I'm sure you as well, that there's all like spectrum of devotee leaders, whether they're sannyasis or householders or whatever, who have all different kinds of viewpoints or opinions or approaches to how they try to encourage others in devotional service. So I don't necessarily think it's like an ashram thing or a generational thing. Um, it might be like an ISKCON cultural thing that some uh, devotees have grown out of, or maybe never integrated as much as others. Um, Especially, I think during like the 80s and 90s, there was kind of like an attitude of like really being strict about things. At least that's the impression that I get. And perhaps even maybe being a little fanatical in many cases. Um, but I think Prabhupada said it best when he said that a devotee is strict and conservative with themselves and liberal with others. So a devotee should be liberal in their willingness to give opportunities for Krishna consciousness to anyone, while strict in their own practice. And then, if you have a relationship with someone where, they trust you and they want to hear what you have to say about this or that, then maybe you can point out that in a nice way that, okay, maybe this thing that you're doing isn't so conducive to spiritual life, or maybe you could consider like taking a different approach in this or that way. Um, but this approach, kind of old school ISKCON approach of uh, just smash everyone over the head, with this point or that point. That's just not going to work with people these days. Like, and I worry about ISKCON kind of becoming outmoded by not learning to adapt to how people think in modern times, and being out of touch with what people's actual concerns and experiences are and where people are coming from. Um, and in that way not being able to connect to like the upcoming generations. I think part of why ISKCON was so successful in the 60s and 70s was because you had hippies preaching to hippies. They understood where the people they were preaching from were coming from. And so they were actually able to like address the concerns and what was important to the people who they were preaching to. But I find that a lot of leaders in ISKCON nowadays have become so out of touch with like what's going on in the world, what's going on culturally, and what the concerns of people in the upcoming generations are, that then when they preach, they don't know how to speak in a way that's intelligible to those who they're speaking to, and they don't know how to connect with the concerns that the people they're trying to preach to have. And this is one thing that I've really learned to appreciate about His Holiness Devamrita Maharaj, as I've like more deeply listened to him over the past year and a half, is that he really is like very, very much in tune with what the concerns of people are in general. He reads like the newspapers, uh only like, I think what he does is like a half hour like every 2 days or something like that. He'll like look at the news, or like he'll look at like UN studies or surveys, to just have like a scope of what's going on in the world, what people are concerned about. And he then uses that, especially in New Zealand, to create very innovative preaching strategies, and that are actually working, I feel. And then even for myself also, when I listen to him, I also have concerns about the world, and I like listen to the kind of things that people talk about. And I have friends who are not devotees, and I have concerns about the world also. And I really find that Devamrita Maharaj's approach and how he talks about these things is really well informed. And I really think that it's something that more leaders should take up.
Mm. Um, just 2 points. You said just now about how ISKCON needs to learn to adapt, and I was thinking in my head, yes, it needs to learn to adapt based on time, place, and circumstance.
Mhm.
So I say this to devotees often. It's absolutely not changing the message. It's about changing the way the message is presented. We look at
Mhm.
Christianity. One of the reasons Christianity has been so successful over 2,000 years is it's learned to adapt according to time, place, and circumstance. So the message of Christianity hasn't changed, or certainly the mainstream Christian message hasn't changed. There are some fringe groups that have a different view, but ultimately the message that Jesus came to save us from our sins and Jesus is God incarnate is the same. But the way Christianity is practiced is very different. I'm from a village in Somerset, southwest England, where the Christian Methodists, our main denomination is Methodism. And that style of Christianity is very different from those Orthodox Christian churches in southern India. It's the same essence and the same sentimentality. I'm not sure if it's the right word to use, but ultimately it's adapted according to time, place, and circumstance. And the other thing to say is one of the reasons I did take initiation from the guru that I did in ISKCON, so I was kind of choosing between two in particular. One of the reasons I chose to take initiation from one that I did is because he did read the newspapers and because he was aware of political affairs, and we could have a conversation about politics. I mean, not on a broad scale. I'm not a clue how he votes or if he votes, but he was certainly aware of political issues and how they impacted the world, and how we are concerned about political issues because they're all around us. And I think it's good to be aware of what's going on in the world. So when we preach, a bit of a religious term, we can, for example, if we're out distributing books in the street or talking with people, and someone comes up and says, well, I think this is all great, all this spiritual stuff, but there's a cost of living crisis going on. I can't afford to feed my kids. I can't afford to put fuel in the car. What are you going to do? Dismiss them and say they're not real concerns? No, you show empathy and compassion. You sympathize with them if you're also going through the same experiences. We are living as human beings. Hopefully most of us have thoughts, feelings, and emotions. We're not all, hopefully not aliens anyway. So it is important to be aware, I think, of what's going on. I'm also aware, Sukhi, we've been chatting for way over 2 hours, which is great, actually. It's been wonderful. And it's been great to have you back on the podcast. It's taken 18 months. Hopefully it won't be another 18 months. But I've really appreciated hearing how you're doing, hearing your story, and I feel quite overwhelmed, actually, and maybe a little bit emotional, if I'm being honest, about the impact that the first podcast made, because I didn't know the things that you told me. And so, I'm pleased that this savor that we're both doing is making a difference to people, to devotees in the Hare Krishna movement. Okay, so I think, Sukhi, I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers watching at home. Then you and I can have a brief debrief after. So a big thank you to Sukhi for being our not only our 40th, but our 115th guest on the Hare Krishna Project podcast. It's been great to have her back, to hear her story and to hear how she's doing. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, to hit the subscribe button so you'll be kept updated about future podcasts from the Hare Krishna Project. And also, if you're watching this on Facebook, like or follow the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page. And please do send some feedback, some comments. And if you like what you hear, let us know and share the link with others that might be interested to hear Sukhi's story. So until next week, I'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare Krishna.